first of all, thank you for inviting me to do this. I'm Barry Mason, and I work mainly in private practice with families, couples, and individuals in North London, the UK. Well, I first became interested in systemic ideas in 1977, and I was coming to the end of my social work training. And then in 1980, I started training at the Institute of Family Therapy in London. I had been to a couple of conferences before I started the training at the Institute. And the first one was with Salvador Minucci, and it was at the Family Institute in Cardiff, where I was later to work. And it was he was, as people will know, that Salvador Minucci was very charismatic, lovely bloke, and very charismatic. And I started to try and work like him, and it didn't really take off. He had charisma, and I think I probably lacked it. And I felt the view was that, okay, you had to be very active, so it didn't really suit me. And what happened then was that I got to learn and was introduced to the Milan approach, and it was a much sort of fitted with who I was as a person. It was a sort of the relationship between self and the professional aspect. And I was a quieter person, and this seemed to fit with me. In fact, I just remember Lynn Hoffman's book, Foundations of Family Therapy, which was, the chapter at the end was the quiet revolution in Milan. And so I really got into that. And so I became a Milan therapist. And it went from there, really. I finished training, and then not long afterwards, I started lecturing at the Institute. And then I went to the Family Institute in Cardiff. I worked there for 7 years. And then I got a job as training director at the Institute of Family Therapy. And then a couple of years later, I became the director. So that's basically my timeline as far as my interest in it. Because I think the other thing, just to mention, is that some years later, Lynn Hoffman, I was at a workshop of hers, and she said, one of the things she said about systemic work and family therapy in the UK was that there was much more of an emphasis on applying systemic ideas to different contexts, and not necessarily pure family therapy, so to speak. And she was very impressed with that. And I think that's one of the things that in the UK we've been very good at, I think, applying systemic ideas to different contexts, including, making sure we address gender, politics, John Burnham's work on the social graces. That was those are the kind of issues that were also starting to influence me. One of the things that struck me in the early days of my training, 1980, the early 80s, was that I would read articles, and the language, the language would at times put me off. Of course, I was learning a new language, a new systemic language. But also, it seemed to me that some of it was written in a way which distanced the reader from the ideas rather than engage them. Certainly, that was how I experienced it. And I always remember saying, I hadn't written anything at that stage. I always remember saying to myself, okay, if I ever write anything, I will try to address the complexity but do it in a way that's readable. And I think in terms of my career, that's what I've tried to do. It's for others to judge. But that was an important thought that I had at that time. And that's, led me along a particular way of writing in that time. As many people know, in the late 70s, early 80s, there was a paradigm shift from what was known as a first order to a second order perspective. And basically, a second order perspective was that the act of observation influences that which is observed. And that, you could no longer not include yourself in, what was happening with you in a therapeutic relationship, for example. And so I sort of became very influenced, like many people, with that shift. But it raised the issue about, how do systemic people look at self? Because self was associated with, psychoanalytic, psychodynamic thinking, and I'd always been influenced by sort of asking, well, where is self in all this? It's like I was saying before, that the fact that how did I choose the Milan approach? Well, it was fitted more my personality. So that was always around for me. That's been maintained throughout. I think now people are much more within the systemic field, are much more into looking at self, but addressing self not as therapy, but addressing self, aspects of self, in the service of the professional task. That's how I tend to put it. So that's sort of one area that I particularly think about. In terms of the ideas that I've developed, I suppose there are a number, and that all of them seem to be related in a way to aspects of risk. I suppose the obvious one for people who know my work is the original paper in 1993 on towards positions of safe uncertainty. And that was really to do with the danger, I think, at times of us trying to get into safe certainty. And so I developed this quadrant, which was unsafe uncertainty in one corner, and then safe certainty, and then unsafe certainty, and safe uncertainty. And I suppose unsafe uncertainty was very much about, we often see people who reach the end of their tether, things are going wrong for them emotionally, very difficult times, also, thinking financially. And one of the things that happens at those times is that, understandably, you want someone, and we've all been there, where things get difficult. You want somebody to give you safe certainty, just make it all right. But the problem is that that can only be temporary, like removing a child from their carers. And it doesn't exist except in our desire for it to be so. And then there's another aspect, which was where people are very certain of what should be, but it's very unsafe. I think of Donald Trump in this regard. And what we're trying to find is help people find a position of safe uncertainty, where one can address doubt and uncertainty, but feel safer in doing so, basically. And so that's been a sort of a sort of bedrock, really, of what I've done since then. But associated with the safe uncertainty idea and the original paper was the idea of the concept of authoritative doubt, which is the ownership of expertise in the context of uncertainty. And one of the things that I became a bit disillusioned with the not knowing position was that people would take a great idea, and I took that on myself. But sometimes people were taking it to an extreme, as if to say, "Well, I don't know anything, and I won't come in with any of my own ideas because I'm marginalizing the client." And I felt that wasn't helpful. So the idea of authoritative doubt came up for me. And that's where people could come in, where clinicians could come in with some of their own ideas, not from a place of certainty, but as as contributions for consideration. So that was that's been a particularly important idea for me in the way I practice and how it influences the therapeutic relationship. Another idea that's been important for me is about the ownership of expertise, following on from authoritative doubt. And it seems that there are two particular ways in which we own our expertise. One is through the asking of questions, which family therapists and systemic thinkers have been very creative about. And the other is the giving of our ideas, as I say, for consideration. And I think for a long time, as I said previously, that people were reluctant to give their own ideas. And I think it has improved. I mean, if you go to a GP and you say, "What you're thinking about this," you don't really want them to say, "Well, I only ask questions." You want some. It's not a sin to sort of, for us to come out and say, "Well, these are sort of ideas that I've got. I don't know whether they fit for you." That sort of relational reflexivity that John Burnham developed. So I think that's helping people, and certainly in the training I do, helping people to feel more confident about bringing some of their own thinking into the work that's being done, both in clinical work and in supervision, other forms of consultation. Another issue that I sort of developed is something I call relational risk-taking. And I see two types of risk-taking. One is individual, often driving a car fast, climbing a mountain, or getting on a horse. They may have relational implications, but in the forefront of their individual. And so relational risk-taking is the taking of emotional initiatives. And I've come to the conclusion that a lot of the time in my work, this is what I'm doing. I'm helping people become better at taking relational risks. To talk about the previously unsaid, I think, as Peter Rover talked and written about. And so I work with people in helping them to do that. And once they become better at relational risk-taking, there's usually sort of an improvement in the relationships, the significant intimate relationships they have. The American photographer, Diane Arbus, once wrote and once said that the in terms of being a photographer, you take pictures of what you fear. And I think that's a good way of thinking about relational risk-taking, and also helping people to move towards feeling more confident in terms of, yes, moving towards addressing tension in relationships rather than pulling away from the tension. That I would also see that as part of relational risk-taking. One of the things that happened when at the Institute of Family Therapy about 2000, that we formed a multicultural group which met once a month, and to look at taking risks multiculturally, particularly for white people, such as myself. And so we met for about 2 years, and some very really constructive, creative ideas came out. Tension there as well, but it was good. And what we did, what came out of that was we, myself and British Black Canadian woman, Alice Sawyer, we co-edited a book called Exploring the Unsaid, about taking risks cross-culturally. I think we all do. We all, when we're working, we all have ideas of what change is. And I have a sort of like equation for change, which is that change equals a commitment to experimenting with often small difference, and then putting that into action. And for change to be changed, there has to be repetition, and that involves time. So one of the things I usually do, and often it happens in the first session, towards the end of the first session, I ask people to choose something. Sometimes it happens in the session, they do it. What would they choose to experiment with? That might make a useful difference to their relationship. I particularly use it with couples. And sometimes what I do is I say to people, well, we won't discuss it now, but I'd like you to go away, and in a couple of days, I'd like you to, each of you, if it's a couple, email me separately about what you've decided to experiment with, but you mustn't tell the other person. And then when we come back to the next session, I'll ask you, each of you, did you notice what the other chose to experiment with? And so there's sort of humor in it as well, but it's what Bateson would call serious play. It's like sort of the use of humor. It's important to use humor as a springboard into seriousness rather than a springboard away from seriousness. One of the things I like about developing ideas is that they're not sort of fixed ideas. They're used in different contexts. And one of the things that I've really been fascinated by and have learned from is the way people have adapted the ideas and taken them on and used them in ways that I would never have thought of. So it's fascinating for me. I don't wish to sort of write and this is how it is exactly. And the Milan people used to say the same, that it rather depended on how ideas were used and developed. It was very much to do with the culture of places the ideas were taken on. And I always remember Gianfranco talking about Scandinavia, where he went a lot, and how the ideas had been used in different ways. So I think that's something that is good. You develop an idea, and then somebody takes it off in a different direction.